As the world turns away from the US, why is Canada becoming the chosen one? Oil prices are soaring. Supply chains are breaking. Longtime allies are being hit with tariffs like it's a game of economic poker. As the United States grows increasingly unpredictable, 10 major countries, from China and Japan to Germany and India, are quietly shifting their trade routes northward. No noise, no declarations. But with each contract signed, each shipment sent, the map of global commerce is slowly being redrawn, with Canada at the center. Why? And what exactly is changing? Canada. When stability becomes the new power in global trade. One day, you wake up and realize that wheat no longer comes from the usual place. Oil becomes scarce. Import contracts are suspended, and with a single keystroke, your government realizes that essential supplies are being choked off by a longtime ally. That scenario is no longer hypothetical. It's happening, bit by bit, place by place, as the world witnesses a quiet yet profound shift. Major economic powers no longer see the United States as their commercial anchor. And Canada, a country once described as quiet, polite, and rarely interfering in global politics, is becoming the new anchor of economic trust. It's strange how, in an era of instability, steadiness has become a competitive strategic advantage. Canada doesn't need thunderous declarations. It doesn't need to impose aid packages or host grand summits to assert its position. Instead, it lets the data speak. It lets the capital find its way. And it lets nations once dependent on Washington, once brought to their knees by tariff uncertainty, find in Ottawa a partner who doesn't politicize trade, something more valuable than ever. Look at China, the world's second-largest economy, known for its long-term strategy and pragmatic thinking. In April, for the first time in history, China imported more oil from Canada than from the US. A number that didn't just shock trading floors, it rattled the confidence of policymakers in Washington. This isn't just a shift in supply, it's an unspoken declaration. We're not waiting anymore. The reason behind that move is clear. China, like many nations, has grown used to sudden changes in U.S. trade policy, sometimes triggered by a tweet, an election result, or a campaign strategy. Meanwhile, Canada issues policies through a stable democratic process. No surprises, no weaponized trade. That's exactly what leaders in Beijing, Tokyo, Berlin, and New Delhi are looking for. Not a loud ally, but a partner who keeps their word. This shift isn't a rebellion. It's a migration. Quiet, deliberate, and irreversible. Because trust, once broken in economic relationships, is hard to restore. While the U.S. still believes its economic strength is irreplaceable, the world is proving otherwise. Replacement is not only possible, it's already underway. Canada isn't necessarily the perfect alternative, but in a world exhausted by uncertainty, it carries a strange and powerful appeal. Comprehensive trade agreements, serious climate policy, commitments to the WTO, and a neutral stance in geopolitical conflicts all come together to form a new model of economy, where stability holds value equal to profit. No one dares to say Canada will become the next superpower, but very likely it's rewriting how superpowers ought to behave in the 21st century. Gone is the era of nations doing trade with fists. This is the era of handshakes without daggers hidden in sleeves. And if the world is moving in that direction, then Canada, through its very steadiness, is leading without needing to fight. In the decades-long geopolitical game among nations that speak loudly and act unpredictably, Canada is winning in the quietest way, by becoming the place where major economies return, not because they're forced to, but because they want to stay. Japan. When trust quietly shifts away from the U.S. and turns toward the Northwest. In diplomacy and international trade, major movements don't always begin with loud noises. Sometimes it's just a liquefied natural gas contract signed in silence, an off-camera meeting, a shipment leaving port with no media coverage. But beneath that frozen silence, the current of power is shifting, and Japan, one of the world's most stable economies, is quietly turning its trade wheel toward the North Pacific. Canada. For a long time, Japan has been considered a perfect ally of the United States, not just militarily, but also within energy and industrial supply chains. But that perception is gradually changing. And it all started not in Tokyo, but in Washington, where economic policy is becoming increasingly erratic, where trade is assigned political objectives, and where tariff threats are turning into a permanent tool. For a country like Japan, famous for discipline, consistency, and long-term thinking, instability is not an acceptable variable. Japanese industries cannot build decades-long strategies based on decisions that shift with every election cycle. And when the U.S. began threatening tariffs even on liquefied natural gas, LNG, one of Japan's key energy imports, the first question wasn't why, but replace with whom. Canada entered the picture like a supporting character who had long awaited its script. From British Columbia, where the LNG Canada project is entering its final stages, to West Coast ports like Kitimat, the Maple Leaf Nation is quietly building a foundation for clean, stable energy exports, just as Japan needs a reliable alternative supply. Japan's choice wasn't only driven by economic logic, it was also a political reflex. They've seen how the world can spiral when the Russia-Ukraine war breaks out, when gas prices triple overnight, when transport routes are blocked by geopolitics. Japan understands that to survive in a new era, it must diversify all risks and cannot place everything into one basket named the United States. And Canada, with its geographical proximity, aligned environmental policies, and calm negotiation style, became the ideal puzzle piece. Strategic planners in Tokyo see Ottawa not just as an LNG supplier, but as a partner capable of building trust over decades. When the first tankers carrying LNG from Canada arrived at Japanese ports, they didn't just deliver fuel, they delivered a message. We are choosing again. But this pivot doesn't stop at energy. In clean technology, electric vehicles, and advanced components, sectors in which Japan is investing heavily to maintain its competitive edge, companies are also expanding their networks of cooperation with Canadian businesses. Partly due to lower operating costs than the U.S., partly because of bilateral trade incentives, but more deeply because of something intangible: predictability. In an era when the world grows weary of stage-managed handshakes and treaties that can be undone within a single term, Canada becomes a destination that doesn't need loud promises, because it is, in itself, a promise. For Japan, that quietness is worth more than any speech. When a country known for loyalty and caution like Japan begins to slowly step out of America's commercial shadow, it's no longer just a signal. It's a warning. A warning that in the New World Order, it's not who speaks the loudest who will be heard, but who keeps their word the longest who will be trusted. And if Japan has chosen Canada as the place to entrust its energy and technology future, then the world should start asking a new question. Who's next? United Kingdom. When a longtime ally begins to unmoor from the United States, there are relationships that seem eternal, built on blood, alliances, language, and shared values. The relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom was once one of them. From world wars to trade, from NATO defense agreements to G7 economic summits, London and Washington have stood side by side as the twin pillars of the West. But in trade, where interests always come before sentiment, even the oldest handshakes can loosen when trust is repeatedly tested. The United Kingdom is not loud. It doesn't make definitive declarations or issue public criticisms. But beneath the surface of soft diplomatic language, trade lines are being reconfigured, and the destination is no longer just New York or Los Angeles. It's Toronto, Vancouver, Montreal. Canada, slowly but surely, is taking over the space that once belonged to America in the UK's post-Brexit economic strategy. Let's look back at the UK's recent journey. After leaving the European Union, the country fell into a vast trade vacuum. In its thirst for new partners, it looked to the US as an extended hand. But what it received was hesitation, delayed negotiations, and later, increasingly protectionist tariff policies under the slogan, America First. While waiting for a US-UK bilateral trade agreement that still hasn't materialized, Canada stepped into the game with exactly what Britain desperately needed: opportunity, speed, and genuine commitment. No one denies that the US remains an important market for the UK, but depending on an increasingly unstable partner has become a long-term concern among British strategists. From pharmaceuticals and high-tech to aerospace, Britain's key industries, businesses are being encouraged to seek alternative partners. And Canada, with its similar legal system, familiar business culture, and transparent political environment, is becoming a trustworthy anchor. New trade corridors are quietly expanding. Take pharmaceuticals and biomedical research. British corporations are opening branch offices in Canada's biotech hubs like Montreal and Edmonton, benefiting from an advanced public healthcare system and well-structured research incentives. In aerospace, a traditional stronghold for the UK, companies are turning to Canadian partners to build precision component supply chains, rather than face increasingly unpredictable US import barriers. But what grabs observers' attention the most is how the British government is quietly adjusting its priority agreements. There's no longer much expectation for a US-UK FTA. Instead, it's deepening the UK-Canada Trade Continuity Agreement, post-Brexit, and moving toward a more comprehensive version, possibly laying the groundwork for joint entry into the CPTPP, the Pacific trade bloc the US once withdrew from. Here, one point is worth noting. The UK's shift isn't a reaction, it's strategic restructuring. It doesn't carry the tone of anger, but the clarity of an old empire that knows how to navigate the turbulent waters of political change. When the British turn toward Canada, they're not just seeking a new partner. They're reclaiming a piece of value lost in the chaos of globalization: consistency. And if even a country once considered America's political twin is rethinking where to place its trust, then the world should consider a larger question. Is the United States still stable enough to serve as the axis of global trade? Or are we entering a new era, where countries like Canada, through persistence, are redefining what economic leadership means without needing force or slogans? The United Kingdom has chosen its answer, and once that choice is made, it rarely reverses. India. When economic maturity demands new alliances. Amid the noise of the Western world fumbling through elections, supply chain disruptions, and mutual tariff wars, an Asian power is moving forward with the calm and decisiveness of someone wise enough to know true development cannot rely on unpredictable partners. That country is India. India was once expected to become one of the United States' long-term strategic allies in the 21st century. A democratic counterbalance to China, a massive consumer market, a promising partner in technology, defense, and energy. But trade realities failed to align with political expectations. And when those expectations were repeatedly tested by tariff barriers, unstable import policies, and Washington's treatment of New Delhi more like a dependent partner than an equal nation, India began to find its own path. People often think of India as an emotional player in diplomacy, but it has proven the opposite: cold calculation. after being removed from the Generalized System of Preferences, GSP, which had allowed Indian goods easier access to the U.S. market, and being hit with a series of unexpected tariffs during President Trump's term, India didn't overreact. It retaliated just enough to send a message, but didn't sever ties. And then it started rebuilding. Not with the U.S., but with Canada. The story began with something very simple: lentils. It may sound minor, but in Indian culinary culture, lentils are a staple ingredient, and Canada is the world's largest supplier of lentils. When trade relations between India and the U.S. soured, Indian importers turned to Canada as a short-term solution. But the stability and flexibility of Ottawa's policies gradually transformed that relationship into a sustainable trade flow. Today, beyond agriculture, India is ramping up imports of uranium for civil nuclear energy projects, collaborating on green tech research, and investing in AI, semiconductors, and biomedical innovation with leading science hubs in Toronto and Vancouver. Canada, once considered merely a backup channel, is becoming a genuine partner in India's strategy to diversify its supply chains and markets. Why does this matter? Because every move India makes is long-term in nature. When it chose to step back from the U.S. in terms of trade, it wasn't just about tariffs, it was about the message Washington sent. Partnerships can change with every election cycle. And an economy growing as rapidly as India's, with a rising middle class and increasing demand for energy and high tech, cannot afford to depend on a partner so inconsistent. Canada is different. It doesn't impose, it doesn't rush, and it doesn't demand that others choose sides. It offers a safe, transparent, and innovation-friendly trade environment. It doesn't talk excessively about strategic alliances. It just signs substantive deals, expands bilateral investment agreements, and lets trade chart its own course. And that's exactly what makes it the most trustworthy partner in New Delhi's eyes. Over the past year, investment from Indian tech companies in Canada has surged. Startups in clean energy, data storage, and blockchain from Bengaluru, Hyderabad, and Pune are opening offices in Waterloo, Calgary, and Ottawa. Even some of India's top research institutions and universities have begun establishing long-term academic ties with Canadian universities, laying the foundation for a new generation of scientific and technical cooperation. If you think this shift is only temporary, think again. India is building a 21st-century economic map, where trust and stability matter more than strength or history. And if the world's most populous country has decided that Canada will be one of its key pillars in the long-term strategy, then it's not just a win for Ottawa, it's a wake-up call for Washington that the world is no longer waiting. Economically mature nations are choosing equally mature alliances, and Canada, quietly, is becoming the chosen one. The Netherlands. When a quiet power plants the seeds of a new trade revolution. There are countries that don't need noise to create change. They don't hold press conferences or issue political declarations. Instead, they adjust contracts line by line, restructure shipping routes step by step, and quietly move capital until the whole world realizes that the old order has shifted. The Netherlands is one such country. Small in size, modest in speech, but with influence far beyond its share on the map. And now the Netherlands is gradually stepping out of America's trade shadow and heading north, where Canada is opening an entirely new chapter in the history of economic partnership. It's no coincidence that the Netherlands is one of the first countries to act. As Europe's logistics center, this country has long functioned as a global transit hub, where American goods arrive, are distributed, reshaped, and sent around the world. But what happens if the destination, or the origin, can no longer be trusted? In recent years, the Netherlands has witnessed something unprecedented. Inconsistency in trade policy from Washington. From tech tariffs, export restrictions on semiconductor components, to disputes over data privacy, the Netherlands, along with other EU nations, has had to brace for dizzying, unpredictable changes without any long-term safety mechanisms. In an economy where minute-level precision is essential, such ambiguity is unacceptable. And as questions about America's reliability grow, Canada, once seen as a secondary option, is becoming the answer. Why? Because Canada doesn't just offer a stable market, but also the elements the Dutch value most: clear climate policy, transparent governance, and a long-term spirit of cooperation that doesn't turn trade into a political chess game. Take high-tech agriculture, one of the sectors the Netherlands leads globally. Dutch agribusinesses have begun pouring capital into greenhouse systems and seed research stations in provinces like Saskatchewan and Alberta, where harsh climates serve as natural laboratories for innovation. No longer limited to exports, they're investing to plant directly on Canadian soil, with the long-term goal of controlling everything from origin to distribution, reducing dependence on volatile markets like the US. Similarly, in semiconductors and electronic components, once heavily reliant on the US market, Dutch suppliers like ASML are setting up distribution systems in Canadian tech hubs like Ottawa and Waterloo, ready to restructure supply chains if the US continues tightening tech control policies. Even major seaports like Rotterdam are now testing direct collaboration models with ports like Halifax and Vancouver, with the goal of building alternative shipping routes in case of unpredictable scenarios from US customs. But perhaps the most important factor isn't in the numbers, it's in the philosophy. The Netherlands has long pursued a soft economic model, where trade isn't just about profit, but about long-term responsibility to society and the planet. In an era where climate change is a matter of survival in the 21st century, partners not serious about green goals will soon fall off the priority list. Canada, with its emissions reduction commitments and investment in a circular economy, is earning full trust, while the US, increasingly caught in internal debate and environmental policy rollback, is falling behind in the eyes of Dutch strategists. What's remarkable is that throughout this entire process, the Netherlands doesn't need to beat the drum. They don't make splashy announcements, nor issue ultimatums. They simply adjust contracts line by line, sign memorandums one by one, and let the flow of capital do the rest. But the outcome is clear. America's trade position is being eroded piece by piece, while Canada, through calm and consistency, is stepping into spaces once reached only by the United States. If a cautious, refined, and pragmatic country like the Netherlands has chosen to shift toward Canada as a long-term strategy, then the world should take note. Because in global trade, what the Dutch do today is often what the rest of Europe will do tomorrow, and the world's trade map is being rewritten, not through speeches, but through each quiet shipment leaving port, each flight without cameras, and each agreement signed without the spotlight. Germany. When an industrial power redraws the path of supply chains, in Europe, no country is more closely tied to the word manufacturing than Germany. The industrial engine of the old continent, the place that creates dream-worthy cars, near-perfect precision instruments, and an economy that runs like a Swiss watch, smoothly, efficiently, and relentlessly optimized. But as global supply chains begin to shake under the weight of political conflicts and rising protectionism, even the German machine must chart a new course. And that path no longer leads to the US as it once did, but toward a destination that seems unlikely yet full of promise: Canada. It's important to remember that Germany is not a country that reacts hastily. It doesn't panic. It observes, evaluates, and acts only after every factor has been carefully considered. Yet the trade shocks from the United States over the past decade, from Trump-era steel and aluminum tariffs to the on-off signals in tech and energy policies during the post-pandemic era, have put German industry on quiet alert. Each trade decision from Washington is no longer a bilateral matter. It becomes a systemic risk for Germany's entire industrial base, which relies heavily on exports and stability in global supply chains. When a developed economy like Germany, with millions of jobs tied to exporting corporations, feels that a partner is becoming unpredictable, it doesn't respond with confrontation, but with risk diversification. And Canada, a resource-rich country with smart investment policies, is quietly emerging as a trusted link in the new supply chains that German companies are carefully redesigning. A prime example is the auto industry, Germany's national symbol. As the world shifts rapidly toward electric vehicles, the need for raw materials like lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earths is becoming vital. Canada, with its abundant mineral reserves and a commitment to responsible mining, has signed numerous memorandums of understanding and cooperation agreements with German carmakers, from BMW to Volkswagen, to secure stable supplies for at least the next decade. This isn't just a transaction. It's the foundation for an entirely new production architecture, in which Germany no longer has to worry about critical materials being blocked by politics or tariffs from across the Atlantic. Beyond raw materials, German precision engineering and industrial machinery companies are also expanding their presence in Canada's high-tech cities like Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, where costs are lower than in the U.S., tax policies are more business-friendly, and the investment climate is less volatile. They're not abandoning the U.S., but rebalancing, and that balance, quietly, leans toward Canada. What's interesting is that German corporations have recognized a simple but existential truth. A globalized economy cannot rely on emotional partners. When each new president can erase previous trade commitments with a single executive order, that's no longer a partner. It's a variable. Canada, on the other hand, through multiple prime ministers, has maintained a consistent trade philosophy: stable, open, and business-centric. Even Germany's top technical universities, deeply tied to industry, are expanding research partnerships with Canadian universities, creating a bilateral innovation corridor where AI high-energy batteries and automation are developed not just for manufacturing, but for survival in an unpredictable world. If a perfectionist country like Germany, which once placed deep trust in the U.S. economic system, is now choosing to restructure its value chains with Canada as a central partner, then this is no longer an isolated phenomenon. It's a strategic trend. And when the Germans, with all their inherent caution, begin to move, the rest of Europe surely won't stand still. In the silent global trade quake that is unfolding, Canada doesn't need to issue warnings, because what is happening, step by step, is already the clearest warning of all, that the old order is shifting, and the nations that keep their word are quietly taking center stage. France? When a cultural power chooses silence to re-establish trade alliances. If Germany is the industrial heart of Europe, then France is its cultural and strategic soul. The nation of revolutions and Enlightenment philosophy, of wine, haute couture, and airports filled with Airbus planes, not only shaping the old continent through products, but also through ways of thinking and living. But now, France is not only redefining aesthetics, it is quietly redrawing its own trade map, with a choice that surprises observers, placing renewed trust in Canada instead of continuing to wait patiently for the United States. To understand this, one must look back at what has transpired in the France-US trade relationship. Once considered key allies in the transatlantic alliance, this relationship has experienced several fractures, especially due to unilateral tariffs imposed by the U.S. on European goods. Tariffs targeting French wine, cheese, and handbags are not merely trade barriers. They are direct cuts into cultural symbols and national pride. Meanwhile, the aviation sector, where France boasts Airbus, has had to continually contend with rotating U.S. tariffs stemming from the nearly two-decade-long Boeing-Airbus dispute. In Paris, it is understood that a long-term economic future cannot be built on a foundation that changes every 4 years. And France, with the resolve of a nation that has led political eras, from bourgeois revolutions to the formation of the European Union, does not sit idly by. It pivots, without fanfare, but decisively. Canada is the choice that requires no ostentation. Between Paris and Ottawa, there are no red carpet handshake photos, but numerous memoranda are being signed in sectors such as high-end agriculture, renewable energy, and sustainable technology. Notably, the French wine and artisanal food sectors, wounded by U.S. tariff barriers, are shifting significantly toward the Canadian market, where consumers appreciate products with geographical indications and a high-end consumption culture, without facing erratic barriers. French tech startups, particularly in AI and clean technology, are also beginning to move their North American headquarters to Toronto and Montreal. Leveraging a multicultural workforce, founder-friendly visa policies, and practical research and development support mechanisms provided by the Canadian government. These movements are not meant to attract attention, but to lay a foundation. A new foundation where trade is not dictated by power, but guided by trust. Beyond economics, it is also about values. In international forums on climate, fair trade, and consumer protection, Canada and France often stand on the same side. From the Paris Climate Conference to efforts to reform the WTO, these two nations support a global trade system that is fair, rule-based, transparent, and environmentally responsible. In a world where short-term interests increasingly overshadow long-term principles, value alignment is gradually becoming the new cornerstone of economic alliances. The United States may still be the world's #1 power, but in Paris's eyes, it is increasingly behaving like an unpredictable partner. And a strategic France cannot rely on chance. When Macron publicly supports the necessity of European sovereignty and diversifying supply chains away from U.S.-China influence, French businesses understand clearly the time to pivot is now. Therefore, Canada becomes the ideal choice not only because of its economic capabilities, but also because of its courteous approach to dialogue. In an era where polite discourse seems overshadowed by shocking statements, Canada's calm demeanor is no longer a weakness, but a new form of power. France understands this. It is not withdrawing from the world. It is merely choosing anew who is worthy to step into the future together. And if a proud country like France has quietly placed Canada at the center of its new trade strategy, then the world should pause and listen to what is not being loudly proclaimed. The global restructuring has begun from the quietest places.